leverage that we have, and none of this involves invading or sending in the troops.
One of the most frustrating problems for people who work in international development are the states whose leadership is not actively moving in the same direction, which seem not open to persuasion and with difficulty open to pressure. And the pain is the people who suffer and our inability to help them. I know one of the more troubling parts of my professional career was when I was responsible for an important part of the Zaire program during the years when Mobutu was the president. And when we knew that there was massive corruption, we struggled within ourselves. Do we continue to try to work with education and health care, perhaps in Ituri, which is so far away from Kinshasa that it was almost impossible to reach, or do we withdraw until the time is ripe? And we face these problems in a very practical way. I think we can work at three levels. First, I think we know leadership is necessary. Leadership at the global community and leadership at the national level. But the one qualifier I would put on that is that if leadership is not genuinely convinced, if people just read a speech or if they adhere to it, it simply will not translate into reality. We know that. The second, and I think this is what's exciting about seeing all of you here today, is that there has to be a broad social commitment to a global social contract, to a commitment to social justice and to the eradication of poverty.
Aber darf ich schnell dazwischen?
Could I just quickly comment on these commitments, these many papers and declarations? Yes, they exist, but they're pretty much waste paper if when the actual individual governments deal with them. You've got paper statements and declarations and commitments, but all that seems to me not to be enough. How do you, Angelina, how do you judge these declarations?
Take a specific case that I think is one of the most frustrating, is we know that the single most important and best investment is something that's been mentioned here by two people, which is having girls in school. That it can transform, it has a huge rate of return, their children benefit. There's a correlation between a child's head size and the mother's level of education, because educated mothers feed their children better. So this is known. The research is known. People give speeches. But I was at a discussion yesterday where it's very clear that having girls in school depends on the genuine commitment of leaders. So we need to continue to persuade. We need to remove the practical obstacles, whether it's no toilets in schools or security for girls or appropriate textbooks or cultural adaptation. But you have to have the action at the ground, but if we don't have the conviction of leadership at national and international level, these things don't happen. They stay on paper, and they don't become the reality that we know can be. You wanted to make a commentary.
I'm sure. Well, I'll follow up on the idea of schools, which I can't agree more that is so important. We all know that that there are so many million children, over 100 million children, that do not get access to an education. We all know this is wrong. What to do about it? There are many different people here discussing it, and there are lots of different theories and some good things happening, and I think we can all just pray that somehow there'll be a big enough movement where this will actually be accomplished. There's this idea of a millennium goal we're supposed to all reach, that this is going to be finally all the kids are in school, free education. And again, this is, I think it's Article 26 or 25. This is a right for children. It's their right to have free education. But one group I'd like to mention, which is refugees, because I work so closely with them, and they are the most vulnerable. They've fled from some of the most unbelievable situations. They've seen their parents killed, they've been raped, they've been through things you can't imagine, and they're traumatized. And these are the kids that really need some help and some focus. They're in a camp, And this is a group of children, if you can imagine. They're in a camp maybe 15, 20 years. Some of the women you're speaking about in Afghanistan, these are young people in a camp. And in these 15, 20 years, we're either going to educate them and send them back to their country of origin, educated and ready to work on reforms, be strong leaders, or we're going to send them back uneducated. And then the country's going to be that much more corrupt, that much more out of control, that many more people fighting for resources because they don't have any other options, because they don't have an education. This group is often a group that when we poll the how are we doing with children's education, often we do it country by country. And this is a group I would just like to point out needs to be counted. So when we count country by country, let's please remember those people that don't have a country at the moment and are displaced.
Yeah,
well, I certainly agree with that. You've got the United Nations doing very good work with refugees in Afghanistan, bringing back 1 million refugees to the country. But it's not just education we're talking about. We're talking about human rights as such. And for 23 years, the world's conscience looked away from Afghanistan, but there are successful operations underway in that country. But if you look at the map of Asia, you can see places where it's just as bad. In Bhutan, there are 100,000 Bhutanese refugees. There's ethnic cleansing, ethnic displacement going on in various places. There are reports that the Maoists have been recruiting people, and there is fear that young girls from refugee camps are being sold into India. So refugees arriving in Nepal from Tibet or from Bhutan, but once again, the world is remaining silent. Everybody signs the declarations, they make protests, but in reality, nothing happens.
Well, unfortunately, it is a sad day when the reality of education is such a privilege, because these people you're talking about, these youth you're talking about, they just want to survive, and first they need to survive, and they are dealing with so many obstacles before they can even get around to the idea of education. So, thank you. It's a very good point.
So let's talk about money also. This brings me to you, Catherine Marshall.
Take this.
Die Weltbank.
The World Bank distributes money, and that money is given to governments, and to governments also in countries where it is known that there is corruption, where we know there are difficult situations. Why don't you work more closely with the NGOs, for example, with Terre des Hommes? It's to be practical, to think of the case of Nepal, where we've heard about. Indirectly, you are supporting these governments with your money, which is actually intended for the underprivileged.
Well, let me give you the easy answer first, which is that the leaders of the world in their wisdom in 1944 created a set of international institutions based on nation states. And therefore, the World Bank is a cooperative of governments. So we must, in any country, whether it's Afghanistan or whether it's Nepal or whether it is Bolivia, we work through and with the government. So that's the easy answer. We don't have money to give grants directly to non-government organizations, to churches, etc. Let me give you, though, two other answers. The first is that something that I tell people, this is a danger of working for something called the bank, the World Bank. Sometimes we call ourselves the bank, is that when people see us coming, they don't see a face. They see a very large dollar sign. And there is the sense that it is money that solves the problems, and it is the money that's important. And yet we know, and I think all of us would agree, that